Richard Hayes laughed when he wrote those 7 words. His assistant watched him do it, watched him press that gold pen down with deliberate slowness, craft each letter like a weapon, and then lean back in his chair with the satisfied expression of a man who has just finished something he's proud of. Come see what a real woman looks like. He sealed it himself, pressed the wax stamp down hard, then handed it to her and said, "Make sure his ex-wife receives this personally. I want her hands shaking when she reads it." The assistant said nothing, but she remembered everything, because 19 days later, that envelope would destroy the man who sent it. If this story moves something in you, subscribe, hit the bell, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far Emily's story travels. Now let's begin. Emily Carter was folding laundry when the knock came. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late September, the kind of afternoon where the Chicago wind had already started turning mean, slipping through the gaps in the apartment windows she kept meaning to ask the landlord to fix. She had a load of Noah's school clothes in one arm and Lily's tiny pink sweater in her other hand, and she almost didn't answer the door. She almost let it go. But Noah, who was 7 and believed that every knock on the door might be something wonderful, had already scrambled off the couch and was reaching for the handle. "Baby, wait," Emily said. "Mama, maybe it's a package," he said with the absolute certainty of a child who still believes the world delivers good things. It was not a package. It was a courier in a black uniform holding a thick cream-colored envelope trimmed in gold foil. The kind of envelope that costs more than Emily's monthly grocery budget. The courier held out a small electronic pad for her signature, looked at her with careful blankness, the way people look at someone they've been briefed about, and then handed her the envelope without a word. Emily stood in the doorway for a long moment after he left. She could feel the weight of it in her hands. Not the physical weight, it was just paper, just ink, but the other kind. The kind of weight that settles into your chest before you even know why. Noah tugged at her sleeve. "What is it, Mama?" "Go back inside, sweetheart," she said softly. "I'll be right there." She waited until he ran back to the couch before she turned the envelope over. She didn't recognize the return address at first. It was a law firm on Michigan Avenue, the kind of firm that handled contracts for people who didn't like to be touched by ordinary things. But then she saw the handwriting on the back, pressed into the cream paper in that same heavy, deliberate slant she had spent 11 years learning to read. Richard. She didn't open it right away. She set it on the kitchen counter, made Noah a snack, helped Lily with her shoes, because Lily at 5 still insisted she could do it herself, but frequently could not. She poured herself a glass of water, stood at the sink, looked out the window at the gray afternoon, and breathed. Then she opened it. The invitation itself was breathtaking, she had to admit that. Ivory cardstock embossed with silver lettering. The Grand Astoria Hotel, December 14th, black tie. The kind of wedding that costs more than most people earn in 5 years. The kind of wedding that is designed not just to celebrate love, but to announce power. Richard Thomas Hayes and Vanessa Marie Beaumont. She read the names twice. She had heard about Vanessa, of course. Everyone in their old social circle had made sure Emily heard about Vanessa within about 48 hours of Richard introducing her at a charity gala the previous spring. Younger, stunning, sophisticated, a finance professional with connections to half of Chicago's investment community, the woman Richard had apparently been seeing for the last 8 months of his marriage to Emily. Emily had not cried when she heard about Vanessa. She was past crying by then. She had done most of her crying alone in the bathroom of this same apartment in the first 6 months after the divorce, with the fan running so Noah and Lily couldn't hear her. She had cried until there was nothing left to cry out, and then she had gotten up. But the note was different. It had been tucked inside the invitation, folded once on a small card with Richard's personal monogram at the top. She unfolded it and read it standing at the kitchen counter, and for 3 full seconds she felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her. "Come see what a real woman looks like." 7 words. She read them 3 times. And then something strange happened inside Emily Carter's chest. Something she hadn't felt in a very long time. It moved through her slowly at first, then faster, and it wasn't grief, and it wasn't humiliation, and it wasn't fear. It was clarity. She set the card down on the counter very carefully, as though it was something fragile. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she folded it, slid it back into the gold-trimmed envelope, and placed the entire thing in the kitchen drawer where she kept important documents. And then she went back to help Lily with her shoes. But she was smiling. Just barely. Just at the corners. The kind of smile that a woman wears when she knows something the other person has not figured out yet. Emily Carter had not always been a woman who smiled like that. 2 years ago, she wouldn't have recognized that smile on her own face. 2 years ago, if you had seen Emily Carter, you would have seen a woman who had been systematically, methodically, and expertly disassembled over the course of 11 years of marriage to Richard Hayes. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about that kind of destruction. It doesn't arrive with sirens. It doesn't announce itself. It begins with small things, quiet things, things so subtle that the woman living inside them often doesn't even register them as damage until much later when she finally surfaces for air and looks back at the water and realizes how deep she had been. It started in the 3rd year of their marriage, or maybe it started before that. Maybe it started on some ordinary Tuesday morning when Richard commented on what she was wearing before she left the house. "You're going out in that, not angry, not even unkind, just genuinely surprised, as though the choice she'd made was so obviously wrong that only someone deeply confused about herself would make it." She had gone back upstairs and changed. And the next time she dressed to go out, she thought about it differently. She thought about how it might look, how it might reflect on Richard, whether it was appropriate, whether it was enough. That's how it works. That's the mechanism. You borrow someone else's eyes and then forget that you ever had your own. By the 5th year of their marriage, Emily had stopped expressing opinions about where they ate dinner. By the 7th year, she had quietly left the small interior design consultancy she'd been building since before they met, because Richard had mentioned more than once that it seemed like a distraction from the family, and that he needed her to be present, and that it was a little embarrassing, honestly, watching her hustle around for clients when they didn't need the money. She told herself he had a point. She told herself a lot of things in those years. By the 9th year, Emily Carter, who had graduated with honors from Northwestern, who had run her own business, who had friends who adored her, who once danced in her kitchen at midnight just because a good song came on, that woman was almost completely gone. What remained was someone very quiet, very careful, very attuned to the particular weather system that was Richard's mood on any given day. And then came the morning everything finally cracked open. She hadn't planned to check his phone. She hadn't been looking for anything. She had simply picked it up because it was buzzing and she was closer to the nightstand than he was, and she was going to hand it to him. And then the message preview sat there on the screen for 3 full seconds before she could process what she was reading. The message wasn't explicit. It didn't have to be. It was the tone of it, the easy intimacy of it, the way it assumed its own right to exist, that told Emily everything she needed to know. She set the phone down. She stood up. She walked into the bathroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the tub, and for approximately 20 minutes, she didn't move and didn't make a sound. Then she washed her face, went downstairs, made Noah's lunch, and drove Lily to preschool. She gave herself 2 weeks to think. She hired a lawyer. She said nothing to Richard. She gathered documents. She opened a separate bank account. She called her sister in Cleveland, whom she hadn't spoken to in 2 years, because Richard had always found reasons why family visits were inconvenient, and she said, "I need help." Her sister said, "I've been waiting for this call." And then on a Thursday morning in November, with the children at school and Richard at his office, Emily Carter walked out of the luxury Chicago mansion with 2 suitcases and her children's artwork in a folder, and the quiet, terrible calm of a woman who has finally decided to save her own life. The divorce was brutal. Richard had better lawyers. Richard had more resources. Richard had the kind of confidence that comes from never having spent a single day wondering whether you were enough, because the entire world had always rushed to reassure him that he was more than enough, that he was exceptional, that rooms brightened when he walked into them. He offered her a settlement that was technically legal and morally obscene. He delayed, deflected, and maneuvered, and Emily's lawyer told her gently but honestly that they could fight longer, but it would cost more than she had in savings, and the children needed stability, and sometimes the smartest move was to take what you could and build from there. She took the settlement. She found the apartment on the south side. She enrolled Noah in 2nd grade and Lily in kindergarten. And then she sat in her empty kitchen at 11 o'clock at night with a cup of tea going cold in front of her, and she thought, now what? She didn't have an answer. So she did what she had always done when she didn't have an answer. She started writing. It began as nothing. It was barely anything. A blog she started on a free platform because she needed somewhere to put all the things she was thinking at 11 o'clock at night and couldn't say out loud without frightening her children. She wrote about the loneliness of rebuilding. She wrote about the specific exhaustion of being the only adult in a household, of being the person who handled every nightmare and every permission slip and every stomach bug and every nightmare again. She wrote about the strange grief of losing a life that wasn't even good, because apparently even a cage can feel like home when you've been in it long enough. She wrote about shame. She wrote about the peculiar shame of being a woman who had let herself disappear, who had handed her own confidence to someone else to manage and watched him misplace it carelessly, and how you go about locating yourself again when you've forgotten where you last were. She expected nothing. She wrote into the void. And then one morning she woke up and there were 47 comments on a post she'd written at 1 a.m. about the first time she'd cooked dinner just for herself and the children, and realized she didn't know what she actually liked to eat anymore because she'd spent 11 years optimizing meals for Richard's preferences. The comments were from women. All kinds of women. Women in their 30s and their 50s and their 60s. Women in Chicago and Georgia and Oregon and London. Women who had never been married and women who had been married 3 times. Women who had never experienced anything like what Emily described, and women who felt in their bones that she was describing them precisely. I read this and I actually cried, one woman wrote. I forgot I used to love to cook. I forgot I had a favorite dish. Another wrote, I've been looking for the words for 4 years. You found them. Emily read every single comment, and then she sat down and wrote another post. That was how Second Sunrise was born. Not with a business plan, not with a marketing strategy, with 47 strangers in the middle of the night who recognized themselves in someone else's honesty. Within 6 months, the blog had 70,000 readers. Within a year, it had 400,000. Brands began reaching out. Publications asked for interviews. A small podcast she launched to supplement the blog cracked the top 50 in the parenting category within its first 8 weeks. Emily hired a part-time assistant from the savings she'd quietly accumulated from her first brand partnerships, then a full-time assistant, then a small team. She studied business development at midnight after the children were asleep, the same way she had studied for her Northwestern finals 20 years earlier, with the same furious focus of someone who has figured out that what she's working toward matters. She was not doing it for revenge. She was very clear with herself about that on the nights when she might have been tempted to frame it that way. She was not building a life to throw in Richard's face. She was building a life because her children deserved a mother who was fully present and fully alive, and because the woman who used to dance in her kitchen at midnight was still in there somewhere, and she owed it to that woman to find her. But she would be lying if she said it didn't feel good. The night the Second Sunrise brand crossed 1 million followers across all platforms, Emily took Noah and Lily out for ice cream at 9 o'clock on a school night, which was the kind of rule-breaking she was still getting used to allowing herself. And Noah said, "Mama, are we celebrating something?" And she said, "Yes, baby." And he said, "What?" And she thought about it for a moment and said, "Ourselves." And Lily, who was 5 and had very strong opinions about everything, said, "I want 2 scoops." And Emily said, "Absolutely." It was around this time that she first encountered Ethan Walker. Not in person, not immediately. His name appeared first in a Forbes article about the fastest-growing educational technology companies in America. She read it on her phone during Noah's soccer practice, standing on the sideline in the October cold with her hands shoved in her pockets, and she noted the name and moved on. Then his company Walker Learning Systems reached out to Second Sunrise about a potential content partnership for a new parenting and education initiative they were developing. Emily's team flagged it as a high-value opportunity. The initial conversations happened through representatives for about 3 weeks, and then Ethan Walker himself called. Emily was in the middle of reviewing edits on a manuscript when her phone rang with a Seattle area code she didn't recognize, and something made her answer it instead of letting it go to voicemail. "Ms. Carter." The voice was calm, unhurried, the kind of voice that wasn't trying to take up space. "This is Ethan Walker. I hope I'm not interrupting." "You are," she said, because she had spent 2 years relearning how to say true things. "But it's all right. I was almost done." He laughed. It was a genuine laugh, the kind that comes from being actually surprised rather than being polite. "Fair enough," he said. "I'll be brief. I've been reading your work for about 6 months. I think what you've built is remarkable. I think the partnership my team proposed is underselling what we could do together. I'd like to talk to you directly if you're open to it." She was quiet for a moment. "You read the blog," she said. "Every post," he said, "including the one about the dinner. I have to tell you, I thought about that one for 3 days." The dinner post. The one about not knowing what she liked to eat. Emily looked out at the soccer field where Noah was running hard toward the goal, his face red with effort, completely joyful. "You can have 30 minutes, she said. They talked for 2 hours. That was October. By November, Ethan had flown to Chicago twice for meetings that kept extending because neither of them wanted to stop talking. He was different from anyone Emily had spent significant time with in years, and it wasn't about his success or his money or the quiet, understated way he moved through the world without needing anyone to confirm his importance. It was that he was genuinely interested, not in the way that men sometimes perform interest in impressive women, that slightly theatrical attentiveness that is really just a more sophisticated form of competition. He was interested the way a person is interested in something they find genuinely extraordinary and want to understand completely. He asked about her children by name. He remembered details from previous conversations and followed up on them. When she said something he disagreed with, he said so directly without apology, but also without the particular satisfaction some men take in correcting a woman, and then he listened to her response with his entire attention. And when she told him carefully on a cold November evening over dinner at a quiet restaurant she'd chosen, because it was nowhere either of them would be recognized when she told him the broad outlines of her marriage and her divorce, not asking for sympathy, but simply providing context, because it seemed dishonest to leave it out. He didn't offer sympathy. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "That man had no idea what he was looking at." Emily looked at him across the table. "Most people don't," he said quietly. "That's their loss." She didn't respond right away. She picked up her water glass and looked at it and set it back down, and she thought, "Do not cry in this restaurant, Emily. Carter, you are not doing that tonight." She didn't cry, but she filed the moment away somewhere careful. It was early December when Ethan arrived at her apartment unannounced, or not entirely unannounced. She had given him the address weeks earlier and told him to stop by any time, which she had meant in the vague social way people sometimes say things like that without truly expecting them to materialize. He materialized. He brought coffee and a container of those rugelach from the bakery on Wicker Park that she had mentioned once in passing 6 weeks earlier that she had loved as a child. The fact that he had remembered this, the fact that he had found the bakery, the fact that he had just shown up with coffee and rugelach as though it was the most ordinary thing. Emily stood in her doorway looking at him for a moment. And then Noah appeared at her elbow and said, "Mom, who's that?" with the directness of a 7-year-old who sees no reason to be subtle about anything. "That's my friend Ethan," Emily said. Ethan crouched down to Noah's level without being asked and said, "Hey man, your mom's told me about your soccer game last week. She said you scored twice." Noah's entire face changed. "3 times, he said, with the precise offense of a child whose accomplishments have been undercounted. 3 times, Ethan said seriously. "I stand corrected. That's elite level." Noah looked at him for a beat. Then he stepped back from the door and said, "You can come in." Emily watched this exchange and felt something shift in her chest, quiet and sudden, like a door opening somewhere she'd thought was sealed. She let him in. They sat at her kitchen table and drank the coffee while the children watched television in the other room. And at some point during that ordinary evening, Emily realized that this was the most comfortable she had felt in her own home since she had lived there. Not because Ethan was doing anything remarkable, because he wasn't doing anything. He was just there present, taking up exactly the amount of space he actually occupied, and no more. It was 2 evenings after this that he found the invitation. He had arrived to drop off a document they'd been working on, and Emily had stepped away to help Lily, who had managed to get paint on something important, and Ethan was waiting at the kitchen counter when he noticed the gold-trimmed envelope partially visible in the open drawer. He didn't open it, He just noticed the edge of it, the particular cream and gold of it, and something about it made him pause. When Emily returned, Lily now wearing a different shirt, Ethan was still standing at the counter looking at the drawer. "What's that?" he asked. Emily glanced at it. "An invitation," she said, something in the way she said it. He looked at her. "To what?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled the envelope out of the drawer and held it for a second and handed it to him. He read the invitation first. His expression didn't change. Then he found the card with the handwritten note and read it, and Emily watched his face. It changed. Not dramatically. Ethan Walker was not a man who performed his emotions at high volume, but his jaw tightened very slightly, and his eyes went still in the particular way that very controlled people's eyes go still when they are experiencing something they are choosing not to immediately express. He set the card down on the counter. He looked at Emily. "Are you going?" he said. "I haven't decided," she said. He nodded slowly. He was quiet for a long moment looking at the invitation, and Emily could see him thinking carefully the way he thought through everything. "You should go," he said. She looked at him. "But you're not walking into that room alone," he said. And his voice was perfectly calm when he said it, perfectly level. There was no drama in it, no theatricality, no attempt to be impressive. He was simply stating a fact about what was going to happen, the way you state facts about things that are already settled. Emily Carter looked at Ethan Walker in her small apartment kitchen with the sound of Lily's cartoon drifting in from the other room, and she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Not gratitude, not relief, something older and deeper than either of those things. Something that had been quietly waiting for the right conditions to reemerge, like those flowers that survive underground for years and bloom only when the season is finally right. She didn't put a name to it that night, but she remembered it. She picked up the invitation and looked at it for a long moment, and then she said quietly more to herself than to Ethan, "He still has no idea who I became after he lost me." Ethan said nothing. He didn't need to. He already knew exactly who she had become, and in 19 days, Richard Hayes was going to find out too. The morning after Ethan found the invitation, Emily woke up at 5:15 and lay in the dark for a long time without moving. She could hear Lily breathing through the baby monitor she still kept on, even though Lily was 5, and had told her 3 separate times that she was too big for that thing. She could hear the radiator clicking. She could hear the city outside, already stirring, already demanding things of people. She stared at the ceiling and thought about Richard's handwriting. She had spent 11 years learning that handwriting. She knew the way he formed his capital R, the slight forward lean of his letters when he was writing quickly, the way his signature looked when he was angry versus when he was confident versus when he was pretending. She had read that handwriting on birthday cards and grocery lists and the legal documents that ended her marriage. And now she had read it on 7 words that were designed to walk into her chest and detonate. She thought about whether they had. She pressed her hand flat against her sternum and held it there for a moment, taking inventory. And what she found surprised her, not because there was nothing there, but because what was there was not what she expected. It wasn't grief. It wasn't humiliation. It wasn't even anger, not exactly. It was something more like purpose. She got up, she made coffee, she sat at the kitchen table in the dark with the mug in both hands, and by the time the children's alarms started going off at 7, she had made 2 decisions. The first was that she was going to that wedding. The second was that she was going to call her attorney. Her attorney was a woman named Sandra Okafor, who had handled the divorce with the particular competence of someone who had seen everything twice and stopped being surprised by any of it. Sandra picked up on the second ring. "Emily," she said, "it's 6 in the morning. I know, I need to ask you something." "Is it an emergency?" Emily thought about it. "It's Richard," she said. Sandra was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "Tell me." Emily told her about the invitation. She read the handwritten note aloud. She heard Sandra exhale slowly on the other end of the line. "He put that in writing," Sandra said, "on the back of a wedding invitation, hand-delivered." Another silence. "That man has never met a consequence he believed applied to him," Sandra said. "What do you want to do?" "I want to document it," Emily said. "I want to photograph it and have it on record, and I want to know if attending his wedding creates any legal complications with our custody arrangement." "It doesn't," Sandra said immediately. "You have every right to attend any event you're invited to. The fact that the invitation was designed to humiliate you is disturbing but not illegal." She paused. "Are you sure you want to go?" "I'm sure," Emily said. "Then go well," Sandra said. "And Emily wears something extraordinary." Emily smiled into her coffee cup. She wasn't going to have any trouble with that. When Ethan called that afternoon, she was in the middle of a content strategy meeting with her team. But she stepped out to take it, because she had learned that Ethan Walker rarely called without a reason. "I've been thinking," he said without preamble, "about the wedding." "About what you're walking into," he said. "Richard didn't invite you to celebrate anything. He invited you to perform. He wants you in that room so that every person who knew you during your marriage can watch him stand next to Vanessa and confirm every story he's probably been telling about you for 2 years. Emily was quiet. She was thinking about how precisely correct this was. "He wants a witness," she said. "He wants a victim," Ethan said. "There's a difference, and you're going to give him neither." "What am I going to give him?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "The truth of what you've built, exactly as it is. Nothing performed, nothing exaggerated, just the reality of who you are right now." He paused. "And I meant what I said last night. I'll be there with you." "Ethan, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to," he said, and his voice carried that particular calm she had come to recognize, the calm of a man who has already thought something through completely before he speaks about it. "I want to. And honestly, Emily, I think you should let me." She leaned against the wall of the hallway outside her conference room and looked at the ceiling and thought about what it cost her still to let people help her. How many years of being told she was a burden had made accepting support feel like a defeat. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. That was the beginning of the 19 days. In those 19 days, Emily didn't change who she was. That was the thing she was most deliberate about. She wasn't going to transform herself for Richard's benefit. She wasn't going to lose 10 pounds or buy a dress that was designed to shock or prepare speeches she didn't mean. She was going to walk into that ballroom as exactly herself, and if exactly herself wasn't enough to silence a room, then nothing was. But she did let her assistant Maya book her an appointment with the stylist she'd been meaning to see for months and kept canceling because there was always something more urgent. And she did go. And the woman who looked back at her in the mirror at the end of that appointment was not a different person. She was the same person, but visible. Fully visible in a way that Emily had spent years learning to be afraid of. She tried on the sapphire gown on a Thursday afternoon in a shop on Michigan Avenue that she would never have been able to afford 2 years ago. It was the color of deep water, long and structured, and quietly devastating, and when she stood in front of the mirror in it, Maya, who was 26, and said exactly what she thought about everything, pressed both hands over her mouth. "Emily," she said from behind her hands. "Too much," Emily said. "If you say too much one more time," Maya said, "I will lose my mind. This is exactly enough. This is the exact correct amount." Emily looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. She thought about the last time she had worn something that made her feel like this. She couldn't remember. And the fact that she couldn't remember was its own kind of answer. "We'll take it," she said. Meanwhile, Ethan had made arrangements she didn't know about yet. She found out about them 9 days before the wedding, when he arrived at her apartment with a folder of information and the particular expression he wore when he was about to tell her something he was confident about but wasn't sure how she would receive. "Sit down," he said. She sat. "Should I be alarmed?" "No, but I want to explain something." He opened the folder on the kitchen table between them. "I had my security team do some routine background verification, the kind we do for any significant business partnership or public event I'm associated with." Emily looked at the papers. And there are some significant irregularities around Vanessa Beaumont," he said. He said it quietly without drama, which was somehow more alarming than if he'd said it with the urgency it deserved. Emily stared at him. "What kind of irregularities?" "The kind," he said carefully, "that I've passed along to people better equipped than me to investigate them." I'm not going to speculate beyond that. But Emily, he looked at her directly, the people Richard is surrounding himself with may not be who he thinks they are. She was quiet for a long moment. Do you know something specific? She said. I know enough to have made a call, he said. And the people I called are doing their job now. He closed the folder. I don't want you to go into that wedding worried about this. I just want you to know that I know, and that whatever happens that night, you're not going to be standing in it without someone in your corner who has his eyes open. Emily looked at him across the table. This quiet, careful man who had walked into her life through a professional email and stayed because he wanted to, who remembered the name of her favorite bakery and crouched down to talk to her son at his eye level and read her writing at midnight and understood why the dinner post mattered. Why are you doing this? She said. Not just tonight, all of it. Why? He didn't answer immediately. He looked at the folder and then at his hands and then at her, and she could see him choosing his words with the precision he brought to everything. Because I've spent a lot of years in rooms full of impressive people, he said slowly, and most of them are impressive in ways that don't actually cost them anything. And then I read a post written by a woman at 1 a.m. about forgetting what she liked to eat, and I thought that's the most honest thing I've read in years, and I couldn't stop thinking about who writes something like that, who has that kind of courage. He paused. And then I met you. Emily didn't say anything. You asked why, he said. That's why. She looked down at the table for a moment. She thought about 11 years of being told she was lucky, 11 years of being told that gratitude was the appropriate response to being chosen. She thought about how long it takes a woman to unlearn the belief that she is something to be tolerated rather than something to be valued. Thank you, she said, and then because she was still learning how to receive things gracefully, Ethan, thank you. He nodded once. Get some sleep, he said. You have 9 days. She laughed, and it was a real laugh, sudden and warm, and it surprised them both. The next 9 days moved with the strange velocity of anticipated things. Her team launched a major Second Sunrise campaign the week of the wedding that had been in development for 3 months, and the timing, entirely coincidental, was perfect in ways that felt almost scripted. The campaign centered on a video Emily filmed herself sitting in her kitchen, no makeup, talking about what it means to rebuild your sense of self after losing it to someone else's definition of you. It was 12 minutes long. Her social media manager told her it was too long and too raw, and that audiences didn't engage with this kind of content past the 3-minute mark. It got 4 million views in 5 days. The comment section filled with the kind of responses that made Emily sit at her desk and cry not from sadness, but from the specific, overwhelming sensation of being understood at a depth she hadn't expected. Women tagged other women. Daughters tagged mothers. Mothers tagged daughters. A woman in her 60s from rural Alabama wrote, I've never commented on anything online in my life, but I had to tell you that I'm 72 years old and I'm still learning what I actually like. It's not too late. Thank you for making me believe that. Emily printed that comment and put it on her refrigerator. 3 days before the wedding, Richard called. She almost didn't answer. She sat with her phone in her hand and watched his name on the screen for 4 full rings. And then she answered because she was no longer a woman who let fear make her decisions. Emily. His voice was exactly the same. That particular timbre of authority, the tone that implied he was accommodating her by making contact. Richard, she said, I heard you're coming to the wedding. I was invited, she said. Right. A pause. Look, I want to be honest with you. Vanessa isn't comfortable with the idea of look, it might be better if you reconsidered. Emily was quiet for a moment. She walked to her kitchen window and stood looking out at the street below. Are you asking me not to come? She said. I'm suggesting, Richard. Her voice was level, completely level. You sent me that invitation. You wrote me that note. You had it hand-delivered to my apartment so that I would receive it personally. And now you're calling me 3 days before your wedding to ask me not to come. She let the silence sit for a moment. Which is it? He cleared his throat. I was trying to. You were trying to humiliate me, she said. And you should know that it didn't work. And you should also know that I'll be there on Saturday. I'll be there because I was invited and because I have every right to attend and because I have nothing to be ashamed of. Another pause. "I hope the wedding is everything you deserve, Richard." She hung up. She stood at the window for a long time after that. Her hands were not shaking. That was the most important thing. Her hands were not shaking. 2 years ago, a phone call from Richard left her hands shaking for an hour. She knew this about herself. She had documented it in a journal she kept in the first year after the divorce because her therapist had told her that tracking the physical symptoms of stress responses was useful information. Phone call from Richard, hands shaking 45 minutes. Being in the same room as Richard, difficulty breathing 2 hours. Thinking about Richard's handwriting on the legal documents. Unexpected crying, variable duration. Her hands were not shaking. She took a breath, and then she texted Ethan. He called. Tried to uninvite me. I said no. Ethan replied in 40 seconds. Good. Then are you okay? She smiled at her phone. She typed, yes. And I mean that. His response came after a moment. I know you do. That's what I love about you. She read that last sentence 3 times. Then she put her phone face down on the counter and went to check on the children. And she did not allow herself to think about it for the rest of the evening because she was not ready to think about it yet. And she had learned finally that it was all right not to be ready for things before you were ready for them. The night before the wedding, Ethan arrived at 7 with Noah's favorite pizza and Lily's favorite sparkling apple juice that she called fancy juice, and treated with the gravity of a formal beverage, and they sat around the kitchen table and ate dinner together. And at some point during the meal, Noah said without looking up from his slice, "Is Ethan coming tomorrow?" Emily glanced at Ethan. "Yes," Ethan said. "I'm coming tomorrow." Noah nodded, satisfied, and took another bite. Lily pointed her fork at Ethan and said, "You have to wear your nice clothes." "I will absolutely wear my nice clothes," Ethan said seriously. "And your hair has to be combed," she said. "Lily," Emily said. "It's a fair requirement," Ethan said. He looked at Lily with complete gravity. "I'll comb my hair." Lily considered this, then nodded and returned to her food. After the children were in bed, Emily and Ethan sat at the kitchen table with the remnants of the evening between them, and for a while, neither of them said anything. There was a particular quality to the silence, not uncomfortable, but charged with something both of them were aware of, and neither of them was ready to fully name. "How are you feeling?" Ethan said finally. "Honestly," she said. "Always." She thought about it. "Ready," she said, "which surprises me. I expected to feel more afraid." "Why? Because I spent a long time being afraid of him," she said simply. Ethan nodded. He was looking at her with that quality of attention she had come to recognize, that complete, unhurried focus that made a person feel like the most important thing in the room, not because they were being flattered, but because they were being genuinely seen. "You're not afraid of him anymore," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," she said. "And that's the thing, Ethan. I'm not going tomorrow to prove anything to him. I know that sounds hard to believe given everything, but I mean it. I'm going because I refuse to let a gold envelope with 7 cruel words on it tell me where I'm allowed to be." She paused. "I've been told where I'm allowed to be for long enough." He was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said. And then, because he was Ethan and he understood timing, he said, "He has no idea what's walking into that room tomorrow." Emily laughed softly. "No," she said. "He really doesn't." She had no way of knowing then, sitting at her kitchen table in the quiet of that Thursday night, that he had even less idea than she thought. That the wedding he'd spent 8 months and $400,000 planning was already compromised in ways that had nothing to do with Emily Carter, in ways that had been quietly unraveling for months, tracked by people in federal offices across 2 different states who had been building a file and waiting for exactly the right moment. She didn't know any of that yet. She just knew that she was ready. She wore the sapphire gown to bed that night. Just for a moment, standing in front of the bathroom mirror before she changed into her pajamas, she put the gown back on and looked at herself for a long time. She thought about the woman who had moved into this apartment 2 years ago with 2 suitcases and her children's artwork in a folder, and enough savings to last 4 months if she was very careful. She thought about 1 in the morning riding into the void. She thought about 47 strangers who recognized themselves in her honesty and kept coming back, kept sharing, kept building something with her that had grown beyond anything she'd imagined. She thought about Ethan saying quietly over a kitchen table, "That's what I love about you." She looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment, and then she nodded. Not to Richard, not to the wedding, not to tomorrow, not to any of it. Just to herself. A small private acknowledgement, the kind that doesn't require an audience. She changed into her pajamas, she turned off the light. She slept deeply without dreams, the sleep of a woman who has nothing left to fear. Tomorrow the doors of the Grand Astoria Hotel would open, and Richard Hayes was going to understand finally and completely and in front of every person who had ever believed his version of the story exactly what he had thrown away. The morning of December 14th arrived the way significant days sometimes do, quietly, without fanfare, as though the world hadn't gotten the memo about what was going to happen inside it. Emily was up at 6. She didn't set an alarm. She simply woke the way she had been waking for 2 years, at odd hours, her body still carrying the old nervous system of a woman who had learned that stillness was dangerous, that you had to be ready, that rest was a luxury that could be revoked without notice. But this morning, the waking was different. There was no clutch of anxiety behind the sternum, no inventory of what she might have forgotten, no bracing for the particular emotional weather system of someone else's mood. She lay still for a moment and took stock of herself. Steady. She was steady. She got up and made coffee and stood at the window and watched the city come alive in the early gray light, and she thought about nothing in particular, which was itself a kind of accomplishment for a woman whose mind had spent years running contingency plans for situations that hadn't happened yet. Her phone buzzed at 6:45. Ethan. "You're awake," he said. "You are too," she said. "I've been up since 5. A pause. "How are you?" "Steady," she said. "You ready," he said. And then, "The security team will be at your building at 5. Car picks us up at 5:30. We arrive at 6, which is 30 minutes after doors open. Not fashionably late. Purposefully timed." Emily smiled. "You've thought about this." "I think about most things," he said. "You know that about me." She did know that about him. It was one of the first things she'd understood about Ethan Walker, that the quietness wasn't absence, it was the opposite of absence. It was a man who was entirely present, entirely paying attention all the time, and who chose his words and his actions with the kind of deliberateness that came from genuinely caring about the outcome. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah. Whatever happens tonight, thank you. Not for the security or the car or any of the logistics, just for—" She stopped. She tried again. "For deciding I was worth showing up for." He was quiet for a moment. "Emily," he said, "I need you to hear something. You were always worth showing up for. The question was never about you." Another pause, and his voice dropped slightly the way it did when he was saying something he meant at full depth. "The only failure in your marriage was his failure to see what was right in front of him. And I need you to walk into that ballroom tonight knowing that. Not performing it, knowing it." She pressed her free hand flat against the window pane and felt the cold of it against her palm. "I know it," she said softly. "Good," he said. "I'll see you at 5. The children went to her sister Carol's house at noon. Carol had driven up from Cleveland the night before and was staying through the weekend because Emily had asked, and because Carol, who had been waiting 2 years to be needed again after Richard spent the better part of a decade making family visits inconvenient, had said yes before Emily finished the sentence. When Carol arrived to pick up Noah and Lily, she stood in the doorway and looked at Emily for a long moment without saying anything. Carol was 4 years older and had her mother's eyes and the particular directness of a woman who had watched her sister disappear into a bad marriage and had learned slowly and painfully that love sometimes means waiting instead of pushing. "You look like yourself," Carol said finally. "I feel like myself," Emily said. Carol nodded once tight and satisfied the nod of someone who has been waiting a long time to hear those words. Then she turned to the children and said loudly, "Okay, who wants to stop for donuts on the way?" And the apartment erupted. Noah hugged Emily for a long time before he left. He was 7 and had recently decided that prolonged hugging was babyish, so when he held on, Emily held back without comment, without making it into anything, just held him and let him decide when it was done. "You're going to be okay, Mama," he said into her shoulder. "I'm going to be great," she said. He pulled back and looked at her with those serious dark eyes that were so entirely his own. Ethan's going with you. He is. Noah thought about this with the gravity of a 7-year-old assessing security arrangements. Then he nodded. Good, he said, and walked out the door. Lily kissed Emily's cheek, said, "You smell pretty," and followed her brother with complete confidence, her purple backpack bouncing. Emily stood in the empty apartment after they left and breathed. Then she started getting ready. She had 4 hours. She used every minute of them. Not in a frantic way, not in the way she used to prepare for Richard's work events. That jittery, perfectionistic preparation driven by the fear of being wrong, of being too much or too little, of embarrassing him. This was different. This was deliberate and unhurried, and almost meditative, a woman choosing carefully how she wanted to meet this particular moment. Her stylist arrived at 2 and stayed until 4:30, and when she was done, she stepped back and looked at Emily and said simply, "Honey," and Emily knew that was enough. At 4:59, her phone buzzed. Ethan downstairs. She picked up her bag. She looked at herself one last time. Sapphire gown, shoulders back, eyes clear. She walked out. When she stepped out of her building onto the sidewalk, Ethan was standing beside a black car, not inside it, not sending a driver to get her, but standing there himself in a dark suit that fit him exactly right. And when he saw her, he went completely still for a moment. Not the theatrical still of performance, the genuine still of a man who has been stopped by something. "Emily," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Is the hair okay?" Lily had notes. He laughed that same real laugh she'd first heard on the phone 3 months ago, sudden and warm. "The hair is perfect," he said. He stopped. He shook his head slightly. "Richard Hayes is going to realize tonight what the worst decision of his life looked like. And I'm very sorry for him, and not at all sorry for us." She looked at him. "Us," she said quietly. He held her gaze. "If that's all right." She considered him this quiet man in his dark suit who had remembered her favorite bakery and crouched down to talk to her son and stayed at her kitchen table past midnight because neither of them wanted the evening to end. "It's all right," she said. He offered his arm. She took it, and they got in the car. The Grand Astoria Hotel was exactly what Richard Hayes would choose for a wedding, which was to say it was aggressively impressive, all gleaming surfaces and architectural ambition, the kind of building that exists to make the people inside it feel important by proximity. The event staff at the entrance wore earpieces. There was a red carpet literal, which Emily had not expected, and which made her almost laugh. Their car arrived at 6:03. Ethan's 2-man security detail stepped out first, positioned themselves without drawing attention, moved with the practiced efficiency of people who did this regularly and without drama. Then Ethan stepped out. Then he reached back and offered his hand, and Emily took it and stepped onto that red carpet in her sapphire gown, and she felt the night air on her shoulders and heard the low ambient sound of the event beginning inside, and she stood up straight. Not for Richard, not for anyone watching, just because standing up straight was who she was now. The moment they walked through the main doors into the hotel lobby, the first person Emily recognized was Margaret Holloway, who had been in their old social circle for years and who had declined to return Emily's calls in the months after the divorce. Margaret was standing with a glass of champagne near the entrance, and she turned and she saw Emily and the champagne glass actually tilted in her hand. "Emily," Margaret said. Her eyes moved immediately to Ethan, then back to Emily. "I didn't know you were, I heard you might—" She stopped. She was recalibrating visibly, and it was not a dignified process. "Margaret," Emily said warmly, with the particular grace of a woman who has moved past needing anything from you. "It's good to see you." She kept walking. She heard Margaret behind her saying something to the woman beside her, and she caught 2 words, Ethan Walker, before she was out of range, and she didn't look back. Inside the ballroom, the effect was immediate and complete. The room held approximately 300 people. Chicago money, Chicago politics, Chicago celebrity in the particular way that Chicago had celebrities, which was to say, powerful people who move through civic life with the confidence of those who believe their city belongs to them. Richard had curated this guest list over months. Emily knew that had placed people deliberately the way he placed everything to maximize the impression of his own ascent. And now every single one of them was turning to look at the woman who had just walked in. Emily felt it happen. She felt the room's attention shift, not all at once, but in that spreading, murmuring way, like a current moving through water. She didn't stop walking. She kept her hand lightly on Ethan's arm and moved through the room with the unhurried confidence of someone who belongs exactly where they are. She heard her name twice in quick succession from different directions. She smiled, inclined her head, kept moving. And then she saw Richard. He was standing near the front of the room with two men she recognized as his business partners, holding a glass, wearing the particular expression of a man who is performing relaxation and ease because he is in fact neither relaxed nor at ease. He was laughing at something one of the men had said when his eyes tracked across the room in the automatic way of a host monitoring his domain and landed without warning on Emily. The laugh stopped, not faded, stopped, mid-sound. His business partner said something and Richard didn't respond, and the partner followed his gaze, and then the partner's expression changed too, and Emily watched all of this from across the room with complete calm and thought clearly, and without triumph, there it is. One of Richard's partners leaned toward him and said something low and urgent. Emily saw Richard's mouth move. She was too far away to hear the words, but she had spent 11 years learning the geometry of his face, and what she read there was not anger. It was something far more interesting than anger. It was fear. Because Ethan Walker was not an anonymous +1. Ethan Walker was a name that people in this room knew. His company had been in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal, and 3 separate tech publications in the past 18 months. He was 39 years old and worth more than most of the people in this ballroom combined, and he was here in this room with Richard's ex-wife, and his hand was covering hers on his arm with the easy, unthinking protectiveness of a man who is exactly where he wants to be. Thomas Grayson, one of Chicago's most prominent real estate investors, appeared at Emily's elbow within 4 minutes of her arrival. "Emily Carter," he said, with the warmth of a man who has recalculated several things in the past 30 seconds. "My God, you look wonderful. I've been following Second Sunrise. My daughter is obsessed. She talks about your work constantly." He turned to Ethan with extended hand. "Tom Grayson, huge admirer." "I know who you are," Ethan said, shaking his hand with the practiced ease of someone who had navigated rooms like this since his 20s. "Emily's mentioned your work in urban development." Grayson beamed. He genuinely beamed in the way that men who are important love to be told their importance has been noted by other important people. Emily had not mentioned Tom Grayson's work to Ethan. She had never had a conversation with Ethan about Tom Grayson at all, but she looked at Ethan with the particular steadiness of a woman who understands that kindness sometimes takes creative forms, and she said nothing. Within the next 20 minutes, 6 more people approached her. 6 people who had not called, had not checked in, had sent no message in the months after the divorce when she was in the cramped apartment learning how to be alone. 6 people who had chosen Richard's version of events because Richard's version came with access to rooms like this one, and Emily's version came with an apartment on the South Side and nothing to offer anyone. She greeted each of them with the same warmth. The same complete, genuine warmth, because she was not performing magnanimity. She had actually arrived at a place where their small social calculations no longer had the power to injure her. That was the most powerful thing in the room, and she knew it. Not the gown, not Ethan, not the security detail that stood at a discreet distance and made certain people straighten their posture without quite knowing why. It was the fact that she was unhurtable. She had already survived the worst Richard could do. This was a party. At 6:47, Ethan leaned down slightly and said quietly in her ear, "He's been looking at you for 20 minutes." "I know," she said without turning. "How does that feel?" She thought about it for a genuine moment. "Nothing," she said. "It feels like nothing." Ethan was quiet. "That's everything," he said. And it was. Because the absence of pain where pain had lived for years was not nothing. It was the whole point. It was the entire distance she had traveled. At 7:04, she saw Vanessa Beaumont for the first time in person. Vanessa was entering from a side door with 2 of her bridesmaids already in her wedding dress, moving through the room in the specific way of a woman who has been told her entire life that every room belongs to her the moment she enters it. She was striking. Emily had known she would be striking. Richard didn't do anything at half measure, and he had never in his life chosen a woman he didn't believe reflected well on him. Vanessa's eyes found Emily within seconds of entering the ballroom. They looked at each other across the room. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, that look, and then Vanessa turned away and resumed her movement through the room, and Emily watched her go and noticed, because she was very observant and had learned to read rooms the way she had learned to read Richard's handwriting, that something in Vanessa's posture had shifted. Something had tightened. Emily filed that away. At 7:21, she excused herself briefly and stood in a quieter alcove off the main hall, taking a minute of silence for herself, and that was when her phone buzzed with Ethan's name. She answered immediately. "Are you not 20 feet from me?" "Look to your left," he said. She looked. He was standing at the far end of the alcove, phone to his ear, watching her. "I wanted to tell you something privately," he said. "I got a message 20 minutes ago from the contact I spoke to about Vanessa." Emily's breath steadied. "And tonight is going to be more significant than either of us planned," he said. "I need you to stay exactly where you are emotionally right now, exactly as steady as you are. What's going to happen in that room is going to be chaotic, and it has nothing to do with you, and you're going to be all right." "Ethan," her voice was very level. "What's happening?" He held her gaze from across the alcove. "Trust me," he said. And the thing was, she did. She trusted him with a completeness that still surprised her sometimes, that felt both new and ancient, like a capacity she'd had all along that had simply been locked away and was only now carefully being restored. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. He hung up. He crossed the alcove to stand beside her, and they went back into the ballroom together. At 7:45, guests began moving toward the main seating area. The ceremony was scheduled for 8 o'clock. Richard was near the altar with his groomsmen, and Emily could see from where she sat that he was talking too fast and too much, which was what Richard did when he was unraveling. He had looked at her 7 more times in the past hour. She had looked back once. Just once. Not with hostility, not with triumph, not with any of the things he was probably expecting. Just with the steady, open regard of a woman who has nothing to prove to anyone in the room. Just with the face of someone who has come to terms with her history and made something remarkable of it. It lasted 3 seconds. Then she looked away first. Not because she was intimidated, because she was done, because he no longer held the center of her emotional world, and looking at him for longer than she wanted to was simply not something she owed him. At 7:53, the musicians began to play. At 7:58, a side door opened, and Emily saw from where she sat 2 men in dark suits enter the ballroom. They were not hotel staff. They were not event security. She knew this the way she had learned to know things through the accumulation of small details that didn't fit the pattern of everything else. Their suits were federal. Their posture was federal, and they were walking directly toward the altar. Ethan's hand found hers under the table and held it, and he didn't look at her, and she didn't look at him, and neither of them said anything, and the musicians continued to play, and the 300 guests began the low murmur of anticipation as everyone shifted toward the moment the doors would open and the bride would appear. The doors opened. Vanessa Beaumont appeared. She was objectively breathtaking. The dress was extraordinary, the kind of dress that takes 12 months to construct and represents a particular fantasy about what a wedding should mean. Every person in the room turned. Every phone came up. Richard's face opened into something that looked from a distance like genuine emotion. She walked 10 steps, and then the 2 men in federal suits stepped forward. The murmur in the room changed pitch. It changed the way a murmur changes when something has gone wrong, when the air in a room shifts from anticipation to alarm, that collective biological response to the presence of threat, everyone going suddenly more alert without quite knowing why. One of the agents said something to Vanessa that the room couldn't hear. Vanessa stopped walking. She said something back. The agent said something again, and then the second agent produced a badge. The room erupted, not in sound, not immediately. First in the peculiar silence of collective disbelief, that 3-second pause when 300 people all try to process the same incomprehensible thing at once. And then in the way of rooms full of people who are witnessing something they will describe for the rest of their lives in a roar. Vanessa Beaumont was handcuffed in her wedding dress. Her hands, manicured and ringed, were bound in front of her with the particular and absolute finality of federal intervention, and the room, Richard's carefully curated room, full of his most important relationships, witnessed every second of it. Richard lurched forward from the altar. "What the hell is—" He reached toward the agents, and one of them stepped between him and Vanessa with the efficient calm of someone who has done this many times and said something to Richard that stopped him cold. And then a third agent, who had apparently entered through a different door, appeared at Richard's shoulder and said something else, and Emily watched Richard's face go through every color available to a human face in approximately 4 seconds. Shock, denial, calculation, fear. The color of a man who has just understood that the world he built has been constructed on ground that was never solid. Emily sat completely still. Her hand was in Ethan's. His thumb moved once across her knuckles, small and steady, an anchor. She watched Richard look up from the agent beside him and scan the room with the desperate, reflexive motion of a man looking for something familiar to hold on to. His eyes found her, and she looked back at him, steady, clear, without cruelty and without satisfaction and without anything he had put there. She looked at him with the face of a woman who had nothing to explain and nothing to fear and nowhere else she needed to be. He looked away first. Around them, the ballroom was chaos. Voices, phones out, people standing, people grabbing the arms of the people beside them, the particular human chaos of witnessing something that will reorder the official story of a room. Emily turned to Ethan. "Is she going to be okay?" she asked, and she was asking about Vanessa, because even now, even here, Emily Carter's first question, when she watched a woman in a wedding dress be handcuffed in front of 300 people, was whether the woman was going to be okay. Ethan looked at her. Something moved across his face. "She's going to have to answer for what she did," he said carefully. "But she'll have lawyers and due process and everything else." He paused. "You don't need to worry about her." "I'm not worrying," Emily said. "I'm just asking." He nodded. "You're a good person," he said quietly. "I'm trying to be," she said. Across the room, Richard was being escorted to a side office by 2 agents. He walked with the rigid, diminished bearing of a man who has spent his entire life believing himself to be the most powerful person in any room he entered, and who has just discovered, in the most public possible setting, that power is not the same thing as invulnerability. Emily watched him go. She thought about 7 words written on the back of a gold-trimmed envelope. She thought about the way his handwriting looked when he was confident. She thought about 11 years. About the woman who had lost herself so gradually she hadn't noticed the disappearance until it was complete. About 1 a.m, writing into the void. About 47 strangers who saw themselves in her honesty. About Noah's arms around her neck that morning, his small, serious voice asking if she was going to be okay. She thought about all of it, the entire accumulated weight of it, and she let it sit in her chest for a moment without flinching from it, and then she let it go. Not because she was performing forgiveness, not because she had arrived at some cinematic moment of transcendence, but because she was sitting in a sapphire gown with her hand in the hand of a man who thought she was extraordinary, surrounded by the evidence of everything she had built from the wreckage of what Richard had left her, and holding on to the past cost energy she no longer needed to spend there. She was no longer a woman with anything left to survive. She was just a woman with a life ahead of her. She squeezed Ethan's hand. He looked at her. "Let's get out of here," she said. And Ethan Walker, the quietest, powerful man she had ever known, smiled at her with something that wasn't performed and wasn't strategic and wasn't anything other than exactly what it was. "Let's go," he said. They stood up together, and Emily Carter walked out of the Grand Astoria Hotel the way she had walked into it. Not for an audience, not for Richard. Not for anyone watching or whispering or updating their understanding of who she was. She walked out for herself, and the night, which was cold and clear and full of Chicago stars, received her. The city was already talking by the time they reached the car. Emily could hear it happening in real time, phones buzzing in purses and jacket pockets all around them as they moved through the hotel lobby. That particular cascade of notification sounds that meant something had already hit the internet, that the story was already moving faster than the people who had witnessed it. One of Ethan's security team opened the car door, and she slid in and sat back against the seat and exhaled for what felt like the first time in 4 hours. Ethan got in beside her, closed the door, the sounds of the city muffled. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Emily said, "My hands are shaking." Ethan looked at her hands in her lap. He reached over and covered them with both of his steady and warm and held them without saying anything, and she felt the shaking move through her and begin to settle. "That's adrenaline," he said, "not fear." "I know," she said. "I know the difference now." She did. That had been one of the things her therapist worked with her on in the first year after the divorce, learning to distinguish between the body's response to genuine threat and the body's response to the memory of genuine threat. Richard had so thoroughly trained her nervous system to associate his presence with danger that for a long time, simply hearing his name on the phone could trigger the same physical response as an actual emergency. Learning to tell the difference had taken months. Knowing the difference now sitting in the back of a car with her hands steadying was not a small thing. "The story's already out," Ethan said quietly, looking at his phone. "How bad?" He was quiet for a moment in the way he was quiet when he was selecting words carefully. "It's comprehensive," he said. "Someone had a phone out during the arrest. There's footage." Emily closed her eyes briefly. Not for herself. She was thinking involuntarily about Richard's face in that moment when the agent stepped in front of him. The way his certainty had cracked open all at once visibly in front of every person he had spent years impressing. She had not wanted that for him. That surprised her even now. She had expected to feel something clean and complete in that moment, some satisfaction that the universe had delivered an accounting. But what she had actually felt was more complicated and more human than that. She had felt sorrow. Not for the man who wrote 7 cruel words on a gold envelope and laughed while he sealed it, but for the waste of it, for the 11 years, for what might have been possible if Richard Hayes had been capable of seeing past his own reflection long enough to notice what he actually had. "Emily," Ethan's voice was careful. "There's something else." She opened her eyes. "Tell me." "The federal investigation into Vanessa Beaumont, it goes further than I knew when I made that call." He set his phone down and turned to face her fully. Her operation involved financial fraud across 7 states, investment funds, shell companies, money laundering through legitimate real estate transactions. He paused. Richard's company was used as a vehicle for moving at least $4 million. Emily stared at him. Did he know? "That," Ethan said precisely, "is what the investigation is going to determine. Based on what my contacts have told me, the evidence suggests he didn't know, that he was in the specific legal sense a victim of the same operation he was unknowingly facilitating." Another pause. "But Emily, his company, handled transactions without adequate due diligence. Whether he knew or not, there will be significant legal and financial consequences." She sat with this for a moment. "He's going to lose everything," she said. "A great deal of it," Ethan said carefully. "Yes." The car moved through the late-night Chicago streets, and Emily looked out the window at the lights, all those ordinary lit windows of ordinary people in their ordinary evenings. And she thought about Richard in that side office with the federal agents, his wedding guests dispersing in confusion and alarm, his $400,000 evening dismantled in real time by consequences he had not seen coming because he had never in his life believed consequences applied to him. She thought about Noah asking her that morning if she was going to be okay. She thought about the gold envelope in her kitchen drawer. "I don't feel what I thought I would feel," she said mostly to herself. Ethan was watching her. "What did you think you would feel, Sam? Vindicated," she said. "I thought I would feel vindicated, or at least relieved, like the scales had finally balanced." She was quiet for a moment. "I just feel tired and sad and grateful." "Grateful for what?" She turned to look at him. "That I got out when I did," she said. "That my children aren't in the middle of this. That the worst thing that ever happened to me ended before it could get to this. Because it was going to get here eventually, Ethan. Whatever Vanessa brought into his life, he was already the kind of man who would invite it. He was already the kind of man who couldn't tell the difference between a real relationship and a useful one." She paused. "He would have taken me down with him, and he wouldn't have cared." The car was quiet. Ethan said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, I need to tell you something, and I need you to know that I've been thinking about how to say it for about 6 weeks. Emily looked at him. His expression was the most unguarded she had ever seen it. Ethan Walker, who was composed in boardrooms and in crisis and at kitchen tables at midnight, who she had never seen rattled by anything, was very slightly rattled. It was, she thought, the most honest he had ever looked. "Say it," she said. He exhaled. "I am in love with you," he said. "Not in the way that means I've decided something about you. Not as a conclusion I've reached, as a fact about myself that I've been aware of for a while and have been trying to figure out the right moment to say." He paused. "There probably isn't a right moment, but I didn't want to say it in that ballroom because that would have made it about Richard, and it isn't about Richard. It isn't about any of this." He gestured vaguely in the direction of the hotel they'd left. "It's about you at 1 a.m. writing something true because you needed to, and not stopping when it was hard, and raising those kids and building that company, and sitting across from me at a dinner table and saying things nobody says because most people are too afraid of being wrong." He stopped. He looked at her directly. "I'm in love with you, Emily. And I have been since somewhere around the second hour of our first phone call." The car was very quiet. Outside Chicago moved past. Emily looked at him for a long time. She thought about what it had cost her to trust anyone again after Richard. Not in a dramatic way, not in the way of movies where broken people are visibly broken, but in the quiet daily way of small hesitations. The half-second pause before she said what she was actually thinking. The reflex to minimize, the learned habit of making herself smaller than she was so that someone else could feel comfortable. She thought about how completely none of that had ever happened with Ethan. She had been entirely herself with him from the first conversation. She had said what she thought, disagreed with him directly, told him hard truths about her marriage without softening them, cried once on the phone, and not apologized for it. And through all of it, he had never once made her feel like she was too much or not enough or anything other than exactly the right amount of herself. "I know," she said. He blinked. "You know, I've known for a while," she said. "I just wasn't ready to say it back yet." She held his gaze. "I'm ready now." And Ethan Walker, 39 years old, founder of one of the fastest-growing educational technology companies in America, a man who had sat across from senators and CEOs and had never been visibly moved by any of them, looked at Emily Carter in the back of a car on a December night in Chicago, and his entire face changed. It didn't change dramatically. It changed the way faces change when something they've been bracing for turns out to be good. It softened. "Okay?" he said. The word came out slightly unsteady. "Okay," she said. And that was enough. That was more than enough. There would be time later for all the rest of it, all the conversations and the logistics and the particular beautiful complexity of building a life alongside someone when you have both arrived at it, carrying everything you've already survived. There would be time for all of it. But right now, in this moment, his hand was still covering hers, and the city was outside, and the night was clear, and Emily Carter was not afraid of anything. Her phone rang at 11:47. She had been home for an hour. She had changed out of the sapphire gown and hung it carefully because she was going to keep it forever, and she was sitting on her couch with a cup of tea, still in the strange quiet that follows enormous things, when the number came up as unknown. She almost let it go. She answered. "Emily." Richard's voice was entirely different from the last time she'd heard it. Every layer of authority was gone. What remained was the raw, stripped voice of a man who has been removed from the structure that held him up and is only now discovering how much of him was the structure rather than himself. I have to say something to you." Emily said nothing. She waited. "What I did," he said. "The invitation, the note." A pause, and she could hear him struggling the specific struggle of a man who has never genuinely apologized for anything because he has never genuinely believed he owed one. That was wrong. It was cruel, and it was wrong, and He stopped, started again. "I wanted you to feel small because you stopped feeling small around me, and I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know who I was if you weren't the way I needed you to be." Emily sat very still. "I know," she said, not warmly, not coldly, simply I know. "The things I said to you," he said, "over the years, I need you to know that none of them were true. You were never—" His voice cracked, and she could hear him pull it back. "You were never what I told you you were. You were better than anything I deserved. I think I knew that. I think that's why I worked so hard to make you believe otherwise." Emily looked at the mug in her hands. She thought about the dinner post, about forgetting what she liked to eat, about all the millions of women who had read that post and recognized themselves in it, who had written comments that she had printed and kept, who had found in her words a mirror that showed them something they'd needed to see. She thought about the fact that none of that would exist without Richard, that the destruction had been the necessary precondition for everything she had become, not because suffering is good or because pain has inherent value, but because she had been the kind of woman who needed to be pushed all the way to the edge before she would discover what she was made of. And she had learned, made of something extraordinary. "Richard," she said, "I hear you, and I want to say something to you, and I need you to actually listen." "Okay," he said. "You didn't break me," she said. "You came close. You were very, very close. But you didn't." Her voice was steady. "And I spent a long time being angry about what you took from me. The years, the confidence, the business I gave up, the friends I lost access to. I spent a long time with that anger, and I needed it, because for a while, it was the only fuel I had." She paused. "But I don't have it anymore. I'm not telling you that to comfort you. I'm telling you because it's true, and because you deserve to know that your cruelty did not have the last word." He was quiet. "You have 2 children," she said. "2 remarkable, healthy, kind children who deserve a father who is honest with them. And I don't know who you're going to be on the other side of what's happening to you tonight. But I hope genuinely, Richard, I hope you figure out who that is, for their sake." She heard him exhale long and slow. "How are you this?" he started, stopped. "How are you this okay? I did the work," she said simply, "and I had help." A pause. "The man tonight," Richard said. "Walker." "Yes," she said. Another pause. "He looks at you the way—" Richard stopped again, and then quietly, with the particular honesty of a man who has just lost everything and has therefore nothing left to protect. "He looks at you the way I should have." Emily didn't respond to that. There was nothing to respond to. It was simply true, and it was his to carry, not hers. "Take care of yourself, Richard," she said. "Get good legal counsel. Be there for your kids." She hung up. She sat for a long time after that, looking at nothing, letting the evening move through her and settle. Then she picked up her phone and texted Ethan. He called. It was different this time. He actually heard himself. Ethan replied in under a minute. "How are you?" She smiled. "Better," she typed. "Tell you tomorrow." He sent back a single word. "Good. Then sleep. You earned it." She put the phone down. She drank the rest of her tea. She thought about Carol, who was at the hotel down the street with Noah and Lily, all 3 of them in the big bed watching movies, because Carol believed that special occasions required cinematic marathons. She thought about calling to check in. She decided they were fine. She knew they were fine. She went to bed. She did not sleep immediately. She lay in the dark and let the day replay itself in fragments. The car ride, the ballroom doors opening, Margaret's champagne glass tilting Richard's face when the laugh stopped Vanessa in her wedding dress and handcuffs, the chaos of 300 people discovering simultaneously that the story they'd been attending was not the story actually happening, Ethan's voice saying, "I am in love with you," the precise way his face changed when she said she knew. All of it. She let all of it move through her. And then she thought about something Sandra had said to her months ago, now the morning after Emily told her about Second Sunrise, crossing 1 million followers. Sandra had said without preamble, "Do you understand yet that you were always this person, that Richard didn't create you by leaving, he just ran out of road?" Emily hadn't fully understood it then. She understood it now. She had been this person. All along, through all of it, under everything Richard had layered on top of her, she had been this person. The woman who wrote at 1 a.m, the woman who got up, the woman who didn't let the envelope with 7 words on it be the last word, the woman who walked into that ballroom in a sapphire gown with her shoulders back, not because she was performing anything, but because she was done hiding. She had always been her. He had just temporarily convinced her otherwise. The news broke properly at 6 the next morning. Emily was already awake when her phone started buzzing with alerts. She sat up, scrolled through the headlines with the careful attention of someone who wants information and not reaction. And read what the world was now being told about the Grand Astoria wedding, about Vanessa Beaumont's real identity, about the federal fraud investigation that had been building for 18 months. About the 300 guests who had witnessed an FBI arrest at a black tie event on Chicago's most celebrated wedding date of the season. Richard's name was in every article. Not as a perpetrator, not yet, and the careful reporting noted the distinction that he was described as a subject of ongoing investigation rather than a defendant. But his name was there attached to the collapse, attached to the evening, attached to the specific and public unraveling of everything he had spent decades constructing. Her own name appeared in 2 of the articles. One described her only as Hayes's ex-wife entrepreneur Emily Carter, who was present at the event. The other, a piece in a Chicago lifestyle publication that had been tracking Second Sunrise for months, was more expansive. It noted her presence alongside Ethan Walker. It noted with the particular delight of a publication that enjoys a reversal, that the woman Richard Hayes had reportedly invited to witness his triumph had instead witnessed his collapse while seated beside one of the country's most prominent young business leaders. The journalist had done her homework. The article included Emily's follower count, the Second Sunrise valuation, a quote from a previous interview Emily had given about resilience and rebuilding. It painted a picture efficiently and with evident satisfaction of a woman who had thrived. Emily's phone rang at 8:15. It was her publicist, a woman named Dana, who had the energy of 3 people and never started a conversation with hello. "Are you seeing this?" Dana said. "I'm seeing it," Emily said. "Okay, so we have requests from 4 outlets already for comment. I'm recommending we say nothing today. Let the story breathe. Let it be what it is without us adding to it. Tomorrow or the day after, if you want to address it at all, we do it on your terms, through your platform, in your voice. Agreed." "Agreed," Emily said. "Also," Dana said, and her voice shifted slightly into the register of someone delivering news they find genuinely significant. The Second Sunrise Instagram account gained 90,000 followers overnight. Emily sat very still. 90,000. And counting, Dana said. And the comments, Emily. The comments are extraordinary. Women saying they found you because of the news story. Women saying they've been following you for 2 years and never told anyone, and now they don't care who knows. Women saying... Dana stopped. When she continued, her voice was slightly less crisp than usual. "There's one that I can't stop thinking about. A woman who says she's been living the same story you lived with a different man in a different city. And she read your stuff last night for the first time, and she called her sister this morning and said she needs help. Oh." The apartment was very quiet. Emily thought about that woman. She didn't know her name or her city or the specific shape of what she was living. But she knew her. She knew her the way she knew everyone who had ever found their way to Second Sunrise, because they were finding their way to themselves through her, and every one of them was in some fundamental way who Emily had been before she started writing into the void at 1 a.m. "Dana," she said. "Yeah." "Make sure she has access to the resource page," Emily said. "The one with the hotlines and the support organizations. Make sure it's easy to find." "It's already on the front page," Dana said. "I added it 6 months ago." "Good," Emily said. "Good." After she hung up, she sat with her tea and the morning and the weight of all of it, the 90,000 people, and the woman who called her sister and the articles, and Richard's voice the night before, stripped down to its actual self for the first time in 11 years. And then her doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone. Carol had texted at 7:30 that she was bringing the children back after breakfast, but it was only 8:30. She opened the door. Ethan was standing in the hallway with coffee and a brown paper bag from the bakery on Wicker Park. "You didn't have to," she started. "I know," he said. "I wanted to." She stepped back and let him in. He set the coffee and the bag on her kitchen counter, and she looked at him in the ordinary morning light. No event, no occasion, no grand gesture. Just a man who had shown up because he wanted to be where she was, and she felt something settle in her chest with the particular permanence of things that have found their right place after a long time in the wrong one. "The Rugelach," she said, nodding at the bag. "The rugelach," he confirmed. She opened the bag. She took one out. She took a bite and stood in her kitchen in her pajamas the morning after the most significant night of her life and thought, this is it. This ordinary, unhurried, unperformed moment. This is the actual thing. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah." "I love you," she said. Not in response to the night before, not as a completion of a conversation that had been waiting. Just because it was true and it was morning and he was here with coffee and the bakery bag she'd mentioned once in October, and she was done waiting for the right moment to say true things. He looked at her across the kitchen counter. "I know," he said, and she laughed. She laughed the way she had not laughed in years fully, and without self-consciousness, the laugh of a woman who is not managing anything, not performing anything, not bracing for anything. Just laughing in her kitchen on a December morning with a man she loved and a paper bag of rugelach and the entire unwritten rest of her life in front of her. And the city outside kept moving indifferent and magnificent the way cities do. And inside that small apartment on Chicago's South Side, everything that mattered was exactly where it was supposed to be. Carol left on Sunday morning. She stood in the doorway of the apartment with her overnight bag over her shoulder and looked at Emily the way older sisters look at the people they have been quietly worried about for years when they finally stop being worried. It was a long look. It carried a lot of history. "You're going to be all right," Carol said. Not a question, a declaration, the kind that sounds like relief. "I know," Emily said. Carol pulled her into a hug that lasted longer than either of them planned, and Emily held on and let herself be held, which was still something she was practicing the simple act of receiving without immediately calculating what it cost or what she owed. "Call me," Carol said into her hair, "not just when things go wrong. Call me when things go right, too. I want to hear that more." "I will," Emily said. Carol kissed her cheek, hugged Noah until he squirmed, kissed Lily 3 times because Lily demanded it, and walked down the hallway. At the stairwell door, she turned and looked back at Emily one more time. She didn't say anything. She just nodded. Emily nodded back. The door closed. She stood in the hallway for a moment, and then Noah pulled at her sleeve and said, "Can we make pancakes?" And the morning moved forward the way mornings do with the ordinary, beautiful urgency of children who need breakfast. Ethan stayed for pancakes. He sat at the kitchen table with Lily on the chair beside him, close enough that she was essentially on his chair rather than hers, which was a territorial maneuver Emily recognized as Lily's highest form of approval. Noah explained to Ethan at considerable length the rules of a card game he had invented, the rules of which changed slightly each time he explained them. And Ethan listened to every revision with genuine attention and asked clarifying questions that Noah received with the satisfaction of someone being taken seriously. Emily stood at the stove and made pancakes and watched all of this and thought, this is what I was supposed to have. This is what it was supposed to feel like. Not the grand gestures, not the luxury mansion, or the $400 bottles of wine, or the charity galas where people wore name tags that listed their net worth in the architecture of their clothing. This. A Sunday morning, coffee going cold because she keeps forgetting it while she talks. A man at her kitchen table who is genuinely interested in a 7-year-old's card game with mutable rules. This was it. This was the whole thing. At 10:15, Ethan's phone buzzed. He looked at it, and his expression shifted barely perceptibly in the way Emily had learned to read. "What?" she said. "My legal team," he said. "They need 30 minutes. He looked at her. "I'm sorry. Don't apologize for working," she said. "Go." He stepped into the hallway and she heard the low, controlled cadence of his business voice, the one that was slightly different from his regular voice, more compact, more precise. And she felt something warm in her chest at the fact that she already knew the difference between his voices. He came back in 18 minutes. "Everything okay?" she said. "Fine," he said. But he sat down and was quiet for a moment, and Emily waited because she had learned that Ethan's silences were not empty. "Richard's company filed for bankruptcy protection this morning," he said. Emily set down her spatula. "Formally," she said. "Formally," he said. "The fraud exposure was larger than initially reported. His legal team is recommending restructuring, but 2 of his major investors have already withdrawn. The real estate portfolio is being assessed by the court." He paused. "He's going to lose the majority of it, Emily. The mansion, the commercial properties, most of the liquid assets, what he built over 20 years. The kitchen was quiet. From the living room came the sound of Lily talking to her stuffed animals in the serious instructional tone she used when teaching them things. "The children," Emily said immediately. "Child support." "Sandra's already on it," Ethan said. "I called her before I came back in. She's filing a motion this week to ensure the custody and support arrangements are legally protected regardless of what happens to his assets. Whatever Noah and Lily are entitled to, they'll receive. Sandra will make sure of that." Emily exhaled. That was what mattered. Not Richard's portfolio, not his mansion, not his reputation. Her children. "Okay," she said. "Okay." She picked up the spatula. She flipped the last pancake. She plated it and carried everything to the table where Noah was still explaining his card game, and Lily had given up on the stuffed animals and was now drawing on the back of a receipt with a crayon she'd found somewhere. She sat down. She poured syrup. She ate breakfast with her children and the man she loved on a Sunday morning in December, and Richard Hayes's bankruptcy filing existed somewhere in the world, and it had exactly as much power over this moment as she allowed it to, which was none. The weeks that followed moved with the particular velocity of a life that has stopped bracing for impact. The second Sunrise platform didn't slow down after the night at the Grand Astoria. It accelerated. Emily had expected, or perhaps feared, that the attention would be of the wrong kind, that she would be reduced to a footnote in Richard's story, the ex-wife who happened to be there, the incidental witness. What happened instead was the opposite. Women found her. They found her through the news articles and through the social media posts, and through each other the way women have always found each other. When someone speaks the truth they've been living without language for. They came to Second Sunrise, and they stayed not because of the spectacle of a wedding gone wrong, but because of what they found when they arrived. A woman who had been exactly where they were, and had written about it with complete honesty, and had built something remarkable from the inside of it. Dana called her on the third Wednesday after the wedding. "Emily," she said without preamble, as always, "we have a book offer." Emily was in the middle of a team meeting and stepped out. "From who?" Dana named a publisher, one of the largest in the country, a house that published people whose books sat on bestseller lists for years. "They want a memoir," Dana said. "Your story, the marriage, the divorce, the building of Second Sunrise. They want everything." Emily leaned against the wall of the hallway and looked at the ceiling. "A memoir," she said. "They're offering—" Dana said a number. It was a significant number. The kind of number that 2 years ago, in the cramped apartment with 4 months of savings, Emily would not have believed was real. "I need to think about it," Emily said. "I know," Dana said. "Think fast. They want an answer in 2 weeks." Emily spent 2 days thinking about it. Not about the money, not about the exposure, but about whether she was ready to put the whole of it on paper permanently in her own name for anyone to read. Whether the children were old enough for her to tell this story without it being something they'd have to navigate before they were equipped to. She talked to her therapist about it. She talked to Carol. She talked to Sandra. And then she talked to Ethan. They were sitting on her couch after the children were in bed, her legs across his lap, the particular comfortable configuration of 2 people who have stopped performing proximity and just settled into it. And she told him everything Dana had said, and then waited. He was quiet for a long moment. "What does it feel like when you imagine writing it?" he said. She thought about it honestly. "Like finishing something," she said. "Like the last step of something that's been ongoing." "Then write it," he said. "It means putting everything out there. Richard, the marriage, all of it. Everything you've already put out there," he said. "The blog posts, the podcasts, the videos. Emily, millions of people already know the broad outline of your story. They know it because you told them at 1 a.m, because you needed to, and because they needed to hear it." He paused. "The book is just the complete version, the version with all the sentences in it." She was quiet. "And for the record," he said, "I'm not in it technically. Our story started after the period the book would cover." She smiled. "You're in the epilogue." "I can live with the epilogue," he said. She called Dana the next morning. "Tell them yes," she said. She wrote the book in 6 months. She wrote it in the hours between the children going to school and the children coming home, and on weekend mornings when Ethan took Noah to soccer and Lily to the art class she had recently decided was the most important thing in the world. She wrote it in the voice she had always written in, without armor and without performance, the voice she had discovered at 1 a.m. in a cramped apartment when she finally ran out of reasons to pretend. She did not write it as a revenge narrative. She was absolutely clear with herself and with her editor about that. It was not a story about what Richard had done to her. It was a story about what she had done with what Richard had done to her. The distinction mattered. The distinction was, in fact, the entire point. Her editor, a woman in her 50s who had worked on some of the most significant memoirs of the past 2 decades, called her after reading the first 100 pages and said with the directness of someone who has stopped flattering writers because there is no time for it. "This is the most honest thing I've read in 10 years. Don't change the voice, don't soften anything. This is exactly right." Emily hung up and sat at her kitchen table and let herself feel the full weight of that for 1 complete minute. Then she went back to writing. The book came out in October, 10 months after the night at the Grand Astoria. It was called Second Sunrise, the same name as the platform, the same name she had chosen 2 years earlier, because it meant exactly what it meant, not a first chance, but a second one. Not the sunrise of a life unlived, but the sunrise of a life reclaimed. It debuted at number 2 on the New York Times bestseller list. By the 3rd week, it was number 1. The reader responses came in waves. Emily read as many as she could. She printed the ones that undid her and kept them in a folder that was growing too thick to close. A woman from Mississippi who had been in her marriage for 31 years and read the book in 1 sitting and called her daughter from the parking lot of the library and said she needed help. A teenage girl who read it because her English teacher assigned it and wrote Emily a letter by hand, actual paper and pen, to say that she understood for the first time what her mother had lived through. A man who read it because his sister gave it to him, and who wrote to say he finally understood why his ex-wife had left, and that he was sorry, and that he was working on it. That last one Emily read 3 times. She showed it to Ethan. He read it. He handed it back. "That's the book working," he said. "I know," she said. "I just didn't expect it to work on everyone." "That's what happens when something is actually true," he said. "It doesn't have a specific audience. It just finds whoever needs it." She folded the letter and put it in the folder. It was November when Richard reached out again, not by phone this time, by letter, actual handwritten letter delivered through his attorney to Sandra, who forwarded it to Emily with a note that said simply, "Up to you." Emily sat with the sealed envelope for 2 days before she opened it. The handwriting inside was different from the handwriting on the gold-trimmed invitation. The forward lean was gone. The letters were smaller, more careful, the handwriting of a man who was choosing his words at a different speed than before. He wrote that he had read the book. He wrote that he had read it twice. He wrote that there was a passage in Chapter 7, the chapter about the dinner, about forgetting what she liked to eat, that he had read 4 times and was still thinking about. He said he understood for the first time reading it in her words, rather than in the version of events he had been carrying in his head, what he had actually done. Not the broad outline of it, not the socially acceptable summary of a marriage that didn't work, but the specific daily granular reality of what it is to have your sense of self systematically removed by someone who claimed to love you. He said, "I did not know I was capable of that. I am learning that not knowing you are capable of something does not exempt you from having done it." He said, "I am in therapy. I am working. I don't expect anything from you. I just needed you to know that the book reached me, that you reached me, that whatever I tried to do to you with that invitation, you answered it in the most complete way possible, and I'm grateful for Noah and Lily every day, and I'm trying to be the father they deserve." He signed it with his first name only, just Richard. No title, no formal close, no assertion of anything. Emily read the letter twice. Then she did something she had not expected to do. She wrote back. Not a long letter, half a page. She told him she was glad he was in therapy. She told him the children were thriving, and that they asked about him with the uncomplicated love of children who are not yet old enough to have complicated love, and that she wanted to keep it that way, wanted them to have a father they could love without conflict or confusion. She told him that she did not need his acknowledgement to be at peace with her own story, but that she received it, and that it mattered. She told him, "Be the person your children think you are. Work toward it. That's enough." She did not tell him she forgave him. She was honest with herself that she was still in the process of that forgiveness, at the depth his actions required, was not a moment but a practice, a daily decision, to not let the weight of it continue to cost her anything. She was working on it. That was true, and that was enough to say. She sealed the letter. She gave it to Sandra. She did not think about it again that day. What she thought about instead that evening was the proposal. Ethan had not proposed at the wedding. The story, as it had been retold online in the comment sections, and the think pieces, and the breathless recaps of the Grand Astoria night, often embellished this detail, added a dramatic public proposal in the middle of the chaos, because that was the version that fit the shape of the story people wanted it to be. Emily had stopped correcting it after the first few times because the correction never stuck, and because the actual version was better anyway. The actual version happened on a Tuesday. Specifically, it happened on a Tuesday in April, 4 months after the wedding. In the kitchen of the house, they had started looking at together a house in Lincoln Park with a yard that Noah had approved because it was big enough for a real soccer goal, and Lily had approved because there was a window seat in what would be her room that she immediately claimed as her thinking spot. They were standing in the kitchen of this house that was not yet theirs, the real estate agent tactfully elsewhere, and Ethan was looking at the window over the sink, and Emily was thinking about whether the counter space was sufficient, and Ethan turned to her and said without preamble, without orchestration, with the complete simplicity of a man who has already decided, "Marry me." She turned to look at him. "Just like that," she said. "Just like that," he said. "I've been thinking about it for 4 months. I've thought about the right moment and the right place and the right words, and I've decided that all of those framings are wrong. There is no right moment. There's just this. You and me in a kitchen that could be ours, and I want it to be ours, and I want every kitchen after this to be ours, and I want Noah's soccer goal in that yard, and Lily's thinking spot in that window, and all of it, Emily. I want all of it." She looked at him. She thought about a cramped apartment on the South Side and a gold envelope with 7 words on the back and 1 in the morning and 47 strangers who became 400,000, who became millions. She thought about the distance between who she had been and who she was and the extraordinary improbability of this moment, this kitchen, this man. She thought about second sunrises. "Yes," she said. He exhaled. And then he laughed that same laugh she had first heard on the phone 14 months ago. Sudden and genuine and warm, and she laughed too. And from somewhere in the house they heard the real estate agent's footsteps and didn't care. They bought the house. They were married the following spring on a Saturday in May, in a ceremony that was small by the standards of people with the resources to make it otherwise. 40 people, family, and the closest friends, the ones who had shown up when showing up cost something. Carol, who cried from the moment the music started and didn't stop until halfway through dinner. Sandra, who did not cry but gripped Emily's hand before she walked out and said simply, "This is right." Maya, who had picked the sapphire gown and who wore the brightest yellow dress Emily had ever seen and was completely unapologetic about it. Noah was Ethan's best man, a title he received with the gravity of a head of state, accepting a significant appointment. He wore a tie he had chosen himself after rejecting 17 others, and he stood beside Ethan with his small, serious face and his excellent posture. And at one point, during the ceremony, he looked up at Ethan, and Ethan looked down at him, and something passed between them that Emily watched from where she stood and could not have described precisely, but recognized entirely. Lily was the flower girl. She had been told to scatter the petals along the aisle, and she interpreted this directive with considerable creative latitude, distributing some petals, pocketing others for reasons she did not explain, pausing twice to examine something on the ground, and arriving at the front with an expression of complete self-satisfaction. The guests found this the most charming thing they had ever witnessed. Lily accepted the attention as her due. Emily walked herself down the aisle. She had thought about this choice for a long time. Her father had offered sincerely and with evident hope, and she loved him for it. But she had walked herself out of the mansion on that Thursday morning 2 years ago with 2 suitcases and her children's artwork in a folder, and she had built everything that followed from the ground of that single solitary step, and it seemed right to walk herself into this, too. Not because she didn't have people who would walk beside her, but because she had earned the right to do this on her own feet by herself, and she wanted to honor that. She walked herself down the aisle, and when she reached Ethan, who was standing there in the quiet way he stood everywhere, taking up exactly the amount of space he actually occupied, and no more watching her come toward him with an expression that was not performed and not composed, and not anything other than exactly what it was. When she reached him, she took his hand, and he held it the way he always held her hand, like it was something worth holding. The minister asked if anyone had words before the vows. Noah raised his hand. There was a murmur of laughter in the room. Ethan looked at him. "Go ahead, man," he said. Noah stood up. He was 7 years old and 3 months. He was wearing his chosen tie. He looked at the assembled adults with the confidence of a child who has never been taught that his opinion doesn't matter. "I just want to say, Noah said that Ethan is a good person. He remembers things, and he's honest, and he combs his hair." He glanced at Lily with the particular authority of an older sibling delivering a shared position. Lily nodded solemnly. "We think he should be in our family. We already decided." He sat back down. The room was completely silent for 1 second, and then it was not silent at all. Emily pressed her free hand over her mouth, and her eyes filled, and Ethan's jaw tightened in the way it tightened when he was feeling something he was choosing not to immediately express, and Carol in the front row was a complete lost cause. Emily looked at Ethan. He looked at her. "He's something," Ethan said quietly. "He really is," she said. They said their vows. The years that came after were not perfect. Emily had learned to be specifically suspicious of perfect, had learned that the pursuit of it was itself a kind of trap. The same trap that had kept her silent and small for 11 years, the belief that the right performance of a life was more valuable than the actual living of it. Their life was not a performance. It was Tuesday mornings with cold coffee and Noah's lost soccer cleats and Lily's absolute certainty about everything. It was editorial calls that ran long, and Ethan's travel schedule, and the specific negotiation of two people building something together when both of them have strong opinions, and neither of them is willing to be invisible. It was hard weeks and easy weeks, and the weeks that were just weeks unspectacular and sufficient. It was real. It was entirely, completely real. Second Sunrise grew into something Emily could not have imagined in the cramped apartment on the South Side. The platform became a foundation, a legal nonprofit, with programs supporting women rebuilding after emotionally abusive relationships, partnered with domestic violence organizations in 14 states, providing resources and community, and exactly the kind of company she had needed at 1 a.m. when she was writing into the void. The book spent 18 weeks on the bestseller list. A second book followed 2 years later, this one about what she was calling the second chapter, about what building a life on your own terms actually looked like in practice, with all the difficulty and imperfection and incremental, unglamorous work of it. Ethan's company launched a major initiative with Second Sunrise, an educational program for children and adolescents on emotional health and relationship literacy, the kind of program that might have reached Richard Hayes when he was young enough to become someone different. Emily thought about that sometimes, about how much harm could be undone upstream. She thought about the woman from Mississippi who had read the book in the library parking lot and called her daughter. She thought about the teenage girl who wrote the letter by hand. She thought about the 47 strangers at 1 a.m. who had looked at her honesty and said, "That's me. I'm there. I see myself in that." Every one of them had changed her as much as she had changed them. Every one of them was the reason. Not Richard, not the wedding, not the gold envelope with 7 words. Them. The women who showed up and kept coming back and built something alongside her without ever knowing they were building anything. They were the whole point. One evening in October, 3 years after the night at the Grand Astoria, Emily was sitting on the back porch of the Lincoln Park house. The children were inside. She could hear Ethan talking to Noah about something, the low, patient rhythm of a man who has decided that this child deserves his full attention every single time, and she sat with that sound and let it move through her. She thought about the woman she had been, not with grief, not with the particular complex guilt of someone who blames themselves for having been a victim, which was something she had worked on in therapy for 2 years, and continued to work on the insidious habit of wondering what she could have done differently, as though the failure had been hers rather than his. She thought about that woman with something closer to tenderness. She had been doing the best she could with what she knew. She had loved a person who was incapable of receiving love without dismantling it, and she had not known that about him. Not at first, not for years, not until the damage was so advanced that stopping it required burning the whole thing down. And she had burned it down. She had stood in that metaphorical fire 2 suitcases and her children's artwork, and she had walked out. That had been the bravest thing she ever did. Not the book, not this platform, not the sapphire gown or the ballroom or any of the things the world had witnessed and turned into a narrative about triumph and reversal and the satisfying machinery of consequence. The bravest thing was the Thursday morning when she walked out the door. Everything else was just the second sunrise. Ethan came out and sat beside her. He handed her a cup of tea. He didn't say anything, which was one of the things she loved most about him. His complete comfort with silence, his understanding that presence didn't require filling. They sat for a while. "I've been thinking," Emily said. "About what?" "About how much of my life I spent believing I was ordinary," she said. "That I was just regular, that the things I thought and felt and wanted weren't particularly interesting or valuable." She paused. "And now I think about the millions of women who read what I wrote and recognize themselves. And I think, what if they all believe the same thing? What if the whole world is full of ordinary women who have no idea how extraordinary they are?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. "That's your next book," he said. She turned to look at him. He raised an eyebrow. She laughed. "I just finished a book." "I know," he said. "That's your next one." She looked at him for a long moment. This man, this quiet and deliberate and faithful man, who had appeared in her life through a professional email and stayed because he chose to every single day as a daily renewable choice, the way love actually works when it is real. "I love you," she said. "I love you," he said. Simple as that. True as anything. The night was quiet and the city was out there indifferent and magnificent. And inside the Lincoln Park house, Noah was laughing at something, and Lily was explaining something important to someone. And Emily Carter held her tea in both hands and looked out at the dark and felt in the full and unhurried way that had taken her years to learn to feel anything completely and entirely at home. Richard Hayes had tried to use 7 words to remind her of who she was not. What he had done instead was clear the ground for everything she was. She had walked out of his story, and walked with both hands open into her own. That was not luck. That was not reversal. That was not the satisfying narrative arc of a woman who was wronged and then rewarded. That was a woman who decided on a Thursday morning with 2 suitcases and her children's artwork that her life belonged to her, and who never, not for a single day afterward, gave that back.